is the decision I'm about to make in accordance with my values? If it's not, you better think a little longer about it. If it's a time-sensitive situation, you're going to make a decision. It may be the wrong decision, but guess what? You have time to reflect afterwards, as long as you take that time for reflection and learning after any significant event.
Right. I mean, the old trope that it doesn't get easier, you get better, right? Like every person Instagrams that or Pinterests it or whatever, and we all kind of roll our eyes at it. But it's true, because the situations that you're going to encounter, the environments that you're going to be in, the events that you experience from childhood into adulthood are going to get progressively more difficult, which is why you need to master the fundamentals and the basics of these ethics that you value, because at each stage you're going to experience more difficulty. But at the end of the day, the same standard is going to be expected of you. And to your point, as you get older, as you get into more intense situations, you're going to have to make those more quickly, which is what all the more reason you should be practicing them from childhood. That's not much of a change for you, right?
My name is Carey. I used to load bombs in the Air Force, and now I'm a writer, a filmmaker, and an entrepreneur. Through using the post 9/11 GI Bill to go to college, working hourly jobs to pay the bills, and freelancing my way into a career, I've studied what it takes to successfully transition from service to civilian, and that study has become a conversation. On this podcast, I speak to other veterans, successful artists, and entrepreneurs about their transition, what they did well, where they failed, what they learned, and most importantly, how they applied their skills. Episode 119 features Mike Sarraille, a retired Navy SEAL officer and the co-author of Scarlett's Big Shot. Mike co-authored this children's book about resilience, perseverance, and optimism with retired pararescueman and the 4th senior enlisted advisor to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Ramon Colon-Lopez. Welcome. This is Veteran Made. This episode is brought to you by Go Pills, a nootropic that gives your brain neurotransmitter support both acutely and over time. Those of us that served in the military, regardless of where we served and in what capacity we served, all came into contact with different chemicals, different percussions, and various elements of our environments that have affected our brain's ability to function. Think about your brain's performance and your mental health right now, yes, but think about your future too. We have so much more control over our long-term health than we realize. Visit gopills.com and use code VM15 at checkout for 15% off. That's VM15 for 15% off. Give your brain the neurotransmitter support it needs to perform well right now and over time.
All right. Good afternoon from the great state of Ohio, and good morning from the great state of Texas. Mike Sarraille, welcome to Veteran Made.
Thanks for having me, Carey. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Honored to have you here. For those who don't know if you are, if you could just give us a brief primer on who you are and where and when you served, and then we'll jump into some questions about Scarlett's Big Shot.
Yeah, right on. So I served in the Marine Corps starting in 98, went straight to a recon battalion. So I was a reconnaissance Marine, scout sniper. Marine Corps sent me back to college. The war kicked off after I went to Marine OCS. So pulled an inter-service transfer to the Navy and served in the Navy, particularly the SEAL teams, for an additional 15 years until I hit my retirement in 2018.
Excellent. Yeah. So, I mean, kind of jumping right in, you have got a new book out here, the first in a series for kids, which is really cool. Ordered it right away. My daughter and I read it, and I was going to look for it today in the house to grab it just for some references. And I went downstairs in the basement and found it with all of her stuff. So she can't read obviously yet at 4.5, but she was still like looking through it, and she really enjoyed this book, and so did I. But if you could just tell us a little bit about what it is, what it's about, and how you got started with the process, and then we'll jump into some content questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is volume 1 of what we call the Left of Bang series. And you being in the military know, we often talk about, hey, is it left of bang or right of bang? For, I guess, the civilian audience, left of bang is the period before a significant event. And the way we perceive it is the development and the maturation, the coaching and mentoring of our youth before they ignite into these amazing leaders that we need the next generation to be. So this one is a one-off. My co-author is Ramon Colon-Lopez. Everyone calls him CZ. That's his nickname. He was the SEAC. Again, for the civilian audience, that is the senior enlisted advisor to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. It means he's the most senior enlisted man in the entire U.S. military. He was a JSOC operator, Air Force, just a good all-around dude, who, moved from Puerto Rico, 14, didn't speak a lick of English, joined the Air Force, and then ascended all the way up, which is, the American dream. So we both agree we are the products of great coaches and mentors in the military. And he lists out, he had access to like the top leaders of the military that were influential. I was more at the tactical level, but still had some great coaches and mentors. And we wanted to pass that on to the next generation and help parents, teachers, caregivers to have conversations about three main attributes around a cute story. And there's guided discussions in the back, but the next volume and all volumes will actually be about a significant military member. And by significant, that could mean a man or woman, regardless of rank, who just did something exceptional, maybe broke glass ceilings. And that is our ode to the military. Even though some, I know for a lot of, again, civilian parents, they probably don't want to see a military figure in a book. I get it. I don't care. And when we thought about this, we're like, hey, this is perfect for a father or a mother who's overseas on deployment to read over Zoom or whatever video teleconference with their kid talking about leadership development. And the reason this is a one-off is my daughter, who's 5 weeks old, is in the other room, Scarlett. So CZ let me run with this one for the first one. The next book's about him. And then we've got some interesting characters. Carey, you would know their names, military figures that we're going to write children's stories on, again, with three main attributes with each book.
Yeah, I love it. So, I mean, what made you start with this one? As you already mentioned it a little bit, but I'd like to dive a little deeper on what made you start with somebody who's outside of the military, the main character here outside of the military. And, a little, I mean, I'm a girl dad. You're a girl dad. My wife played Division I golf. We love women's sports. We love girls sports, right? So that was actually one of the first things that grabbed me when I saw this come across my Instagram. I was like, oh, a couple military dudes writing a book about girls basketball. Like, that's awesome. So curious what specifically made you start with this story to kick off the series?
Yeah, a few things. One, Scarlett being the main character, knowing we were having our child. This came out 2 weeks before she was born. Basketball, that was my sport growing up. I was exceptionally mediocre at it, but poured everything I had into it. You had some great coaches that were instrumental in my life. And, the fact that it was a young girl with a father, playing that influential role in her life, it's going to be the reverse based off true stories. I mean, with Ramon, with CZ, his mom was that influential figure. So she's going to be in the book. But you know what? This is the first time I've written, business focused books before, working on one on high performing teams right now. But with children's books, we didn't know where the hell to start. So we just started from scratch and we figured it out along the way. We weren't going to let paralysis through analysis take a hold of us. And, the story shifted probably no less than 50 times. The illustration shifted. But we would have rather just jumped into the arena and figured it out rather than just make this a 2-year process. In the end, it was an 8-month process. And I think we'll have volume 2 out by either January or February, now that we've got one iteration under their belt. But that was really just the amalgamation of just 3 different things that brought this book to life. And, we're happy with it. We've gotten great feedback. And we're just going to continue to produce these.
I love it. I want to jump a little bit into the writing process that you were starting to describe there a little bit later. But first, why children's books? Obviously, you've already mentioned that you've written some business books. You're writing another one. A lot of operators tend to come out. A lot of aviators tend to come out and write those leadership books for adults, right? For teams in the corporate world, in the small business world, and really tend to go in that direction. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. I read those books. I get a ton from those books. I absolutely love those. But curious what made you start with, or what made you interested in writing a children's book? Because while it is for children, as I found myself reading it as a dad to my daughter, I'm like, wow, this actually distills a lot of these things down for me as a really good reminder as I'm reading for myself that I may or may not get from some of those other, typically highbrow books, right?
Yeah. And you brought up aviators. The one thing I'll say about the books I do write, they're not about me. I tell other stories. I just can't do there I was surrounded by grenade pins and I won the global war on terror.
Right.
And I love telling other people's stories more than my own. But so, Carey, here's, again, you always got to preface it these days. In my opinion, in CZs as well, we grew up in a drastically different environment than the current generation is. I mean, I'm assuming you grew up in Ohio?
I grew up in California and Ohio, but yeah, mostly in Ohio.
Okay, I'm a California boy as well.
There we go.
But still, back in our youth, you were kicked out of the house at 8 a.m.
Right.
and you were pulled back in at like 6 or 7 for dinner. Getting in trouble, riding your bike everywhere, going to the local pool. We were very active. This generation is much more electronics based, and we also felt that less kids are playing sports. You see that with the figures of 70% of our youth is no longer eligible for military service,
right.
Predominantly due to obesity. Education has declined, and how I'll say it, I think those who teach education sometimes are not equipped to teach leadership. Just because you're a teacher that can teach grammar or mathematics or science doesn't mean you're equipped to teach leadership. And you haven't served. What the military is at the end of the day is, yes, are we the technologically most advanced military? Are we the most tactically advanced military? There's an argument to be made there that yes, we are, or no, we're not. But it's a leadership incubator. So to supplement or augment with a book like this, to put this in the hands of teachers or parents or caregivers who you said it, you were in the military, you know these things, but it's still the process. When I hear a great speaker and maybe they dive into a concept of trust, and I'm like, you know what? They totally changed my thought paradigm on trust. So as we dived into resilience, perseverance, and optimism, we wanted to explain it in a way that children would understand. And by doing it, if you don't think CZ, myself, actually step back and we're like, oh, okay, that makes a lot more sense when you just get it down to the lowest level definition you can. And in all fairness, we had two others that assisted with this, Colin Creech, who served in the Marine Corps, and Chris Coker, who was in the Army. So we sort of had all services. I know there's Space Force. I don't know anything about Space Force or anyone in Space Force, but we had the 4 traditional services. And we're going to be pulling, again, if we choose someone like CZ to write next book, we're pulling them in to write it with us. And it's cathartic in a lot of ways. So it's basically to augment what we believe is a decline in leadership development of our youth, and assist people in having those stories. We had one review recently, and CZ and I, had our sidebar comments, and clearly the person that wrote the review maybe is of a different political leaning and didn't like the fact that 2 military guys did this, but they wrote a review about how misguided the book was when Scarlett makes the decision to hang out less with her friends and be on her phone less and watch less TV in order to focus on something and to excel at it. The person said this is an extremely detrimental approach that could lead to mental health issues. And again, it's a perfect example of like, to us, we're like, what are you talking about? Once your kid identifies something they're passionate about, you want them to dive all in. And that comes with sacrifices in order to get good at something. And I think it's where our culture is going, that is saying it's okay to be mediocre. And you know what? To me, it's not. To me and CZ, it's not. So if we can assist in helping parents raise more, let's put it this way. I always say this, Carey. When I speak for a living, that's what I do to companies. I ask how many parents are in the room, and I say, is this an accurate statement? As a parent, we want to raise kind, empathetic, respectful, competent human beings who are a net positive, contribute to society, but more importantly, leave them with the critical thinking skills and the resilience to get back up when they fall down, because we're not around forever. Learn from their mistakes, move forward, and then pass it on to the next generation. And I know CZ's even bigger on legacy and leaving the next generation better than we found it. So that's the genesis.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I love the idea of augmenting, right? Like we can't outsource everything with our children to teachers or to the education system. And we could, it sounds like we could probably, and obviously like dive into some of the cultural and political issues there, but kind of keeping it on track here, you can't just do that, right? You can't say, okay, what's your kid comes home from school. What'd you learn today? Nothing. What'd you do today? Nothing. And then you coax it out of them. And then you're looking at their homework. You're looking at whatever they were coloring, if they're in preschool, or shapes or numbers or letters or whatever it is. And then just leave it at that, right? Like there's that engagement that's required to raise your kids to be invested in who they are and what they're doing. And I think augmenting it with books like this is really great. We have a lot of friends in the homeschool community. And we've been kind of talking about doing some production and media work with them. And my kid goes to public school. She's going to go to public school, but I'm very interested in these platforms that are being developed to say, like, well, how can we augment her education? If they've got a really great art homeschool program that's on YouTube, and we trust the providers that are doing that, well, let's get on. Let's look at what those opportunities are to supplement and augment with the experience that we wanted to have in public school, right? Like there's room for more integration, not like that separation of parent home life and school life.
You want to expose your child within reason to as much as possible. I mean, people look at the term general manager, which actually comes from the military, general officer, where you can have a fighter pilot from the Air Force becomes a general, and all of a sudden they're at the Pentagon in charge of acquisitions. And they're like, I don't know anything about acquisitions. No, but you know how to lead, and you'll have the subject matter experts around you to advise you. Ultimately, you get to make the final decision. So that general management term comes and was meant to mean that somebody has a breadth of experience. They've in the military is a perfect example. You've got guys and gals from the global war on terror that were in East Africa, then Afghanistan, in Iraq, Southcom, UCOM, all the comms. And each deployment was a completely different scenario. I ended up on a ship as an OIC at one point, and I wasn't too happy about it because my brothers were going to combat. And talk about one of the most valuable leadership experiences I've had, because I had to contend with problems from ports and maritime logistics that I had no base. And I learned so much, but even more so how to learn without a knowledge base, depending on subject matter experts around me, how to lead them, how to have conversations and push back, even though they have the expertise in the domain. It made me a more well-rounded leader. So there are so many good programs, and we're seeing homeschooling statistically increase. And then you're seeing alternative education start to pop up, like the Apogee schools with Tim Kennedy, which are based off the Socratic method. And some of the things that they're still hitting I guess we could call it the core curriculum, mathematics, English, science. But the way they're doing it in the real world problem sets they're putting them through is really creating kids that are critical thinkers. And I think from the public school education system, that's where we're lacking. Not to, again, make it political, but then you have somebody who's a teacher who's so politically aligned that really crushes a kid for having a dissenting point of view. We should encourage dissent. Did you ever hear the term in the military? We almost fostered a healthy disrespect for authority.
Absolutely.
With professionalism intact.
Yes.
If you think my idea is bad, then state why your idea is better. And your idea may very well be better, or there may be elements where we combine the plans to make it more effective. And we're not producing that in our children. It's more indoctrination, less critical thinking.
Right. And you mentioned it earlier, and it's become a through line of this podcast, which is that service in the military is leadership training, right? And regardless if you did 4 years like myself and got out as an E4, got out as an officer like yourself, or the SEAC like CZ, the thing that we do really, really well as military veterans is lead up and down the chain of command. So like our ability to speak to a leader in a civilian organization that we have been integrated into, as long as we keep the civilian equivalent of military bearing and respect, then you can have a conversation with these other people because they're just people. And at the end of the day, they are paying you to accomplish a project or a set of deliverables or sales or whatever it might be. So the last thing they're going to want is less information from your point of view and your position on the ground.
You know, could you say there's this hidden agenda? I don't think it's hidden, but we're also, talking to the youth that I loved the people I served with in the military. I say I don't miss the circus. I miss the clowns.
Yep.
For which I was a clown as well. There's things about the military that are infuriating, but I learned the Marine Corps turned my life around, not the SEALs, the Marine Corps. And I loved it. And it was a hard decision to leave, but we weren't part of SOCOM at the time. It just made sense. But whether you serve 4 years or 33, like CZ, which is insane and high on the high end, dude, service is foundational. Not only out of altruism, service to your country, but what you learn and the just total diversity and melting pot that the military is. But I'm actually an advocate of serve 4 years and get out, because more E4s, E5s, O2s, O3s get out and then have wildly successful careers in the private sector, because they're armed with all those tools that they learn from leadership, but then they have enough tenure to go build something in the private sector versus a CZ or myself who are old by the time we get out.
No, I think that's right. And so much has changed in our economy now, where I was talking about this I'm actually going to be writing an article about this. There used to be this idea that you had to serve 4 years or 20 plus and retire to retain all of your benefits. What we're discovering now, as people, while they're serving, who are able to build side hustles or small businesses online, you're actually able to serve as long as you need to, put yourself in the best, financial, relational, familial position that you want to be in, and get out when you want to get out, and then go jump into and integrate into society and culture in a way that you feel is best for yourself, for your family, and for whatever industry that you're going to jump into. So this very binary view of the way that, when you and I got in, that binary view changed while we were in. And so I couldn't agree with you more.
So we almost over professionalized the military in a way. Again, this is me and you talking, and I know there's a lot of veterans, they understand this. It's like the military's, you're either up or you're out, where I highly disagree. If you have someone who's a team leader of an aircraft maintenance, or he's a crew chief and just wants to stay in that position because he loves it, he's good at it, she's good at it, let him stay there. They know the implications of they won't pick up the next rank, but again, their pay will still increase every 2 years.
Right.
We need to allow that. It's the same thing in the SEAL. If he's so happy within a platoon, just leave him there. Leave him there until there will be a time like that person recognizes, like, hey, my body, I'm done. I want to start ascending again. But I've got a company called Talent War Group, which is being acquired probably as of this Friday. It's been a long due diligence. We place veterans into predominantly small to medium-sized businesses in usually management positions. And I'm passionate about that, because veterans let's say statistically, make great hires because of the work ethic, the drive, the adaptability and agility they come in with. But you're an entrepreneur. Veteran entrepreneurship is abysmal. I believe it's 4 or 5% for our generation compared to World War II, where it was close to 50%.
Yep.
And, with this new administration coming in, I think we need to spur on more veteran entrepreneurship. And personally, I'd love to see where they basically have no tax for the first 5 years to get past what is statistically where most businesses fail, in order to manage their cash flow efficiently, create a surplus or ramp to survive from year 5 beyond that. We've got to push more veterans into entrepreneurship. It's quite literally what drove the post-World War II economy. And there's been no, let's say, supportive programs that have set a lot of veterans up for success who may have been on the fence of like, hey, do I just go get a job and be a W-2, or do I accept the risk and become an entrepreneur? And if we just manage the risk a little better with them, with let's say additive or beneficial business incentives, I think you'll see that rate start to go up.
I could get behind that. Let's get in touch with the vice president elect and
I know.
have
Seriously.
that conversation. So back to something you said earlier about having, you use the example of trust, right? A concept distilled down for you. The family business that I did not go into was leadership training and culture development. So my dad did. It's what my brother does now. And so I spent my entire childhood and life sitting around the dinner table, sitting around the campfire, sitting around having cigars and beers and having these conversations and just listening and observing as they were teaching and coaching and working and going out and getting business. And one thing that always stuck with me that my brother said was, if you hear something, a concept, don't say to yourself, I already know that. Ask yourself, how good am I at that? And that's what I think, like, one of the great benefits of this book is you look through and you're reading about resilience and perseverance and optimism. As a parent, you're reading it to your kids and it's being distilled down for you. One of my favorite things about being a dad is being held accountable to the things that I teach my daughter, right? I have to live better and I have to be better if I am going to father her to be better and live better.
So we know the each of the services have 11 leadership principles. We probably knew them all at one point. You had to in boot camp. But there was I had one Marine colonel who was also a prior enlisted. He was a major at the time. He was an influential mentor in my life. And he helped me switch from the Marine Corps to the SEALs, even though the Marine Corps was having an allergic reaction. And he told me, he's like, Mike, don't forget the golden rule. And when he said that, I'm like, the golden rule? No one ever brought that up in boot camp or corporate course. He said, lead by example. Mm-hmm. And he said it's the highest form of leadership. Basically, if you look at it from an industrial organizational psychology perspective, they call it behavioral modeling or observational learning. And he basically said people will be what people can see. Mm-hmm. So if you're not setting the example, which comes to accountability and self-discipline, then you're basically you're advocating for rules for thee, not for me. And I found that extremely powerful as a sergeant who was just commissioned as a ensign in the Navy. And it stuck with me. And did I fall short at times? Hell yeah, I did. Any leader's going to fall short. And to think that because we wrote this book, we're masters in resilience, perseverance, and optimism, we'd be the first to push against you that there's a win column and there's a loss column. And I'd probably have as many wins and losses when it comes to optimism in my life. The reason we write this too is it's, and I always write all my books with friends. It's a conversation, and we're changing our perspectives based off what the others are saying. I'm like, yeah, you actually say it better. I agree with you on that. And so, from this book, we learned about resilience, perseverance, and optimism because of the conversations that came out of it. And we don't want to sit here as like we're some subject matter experts in leadership and organizational culture. We're passionate about it, but we still have so much to learn. And what made you successful leading a maintenance crew or an ordnance crew in the Air Force is not going to make you successful necessarily leading a bunch of civilians in a private sector company. There's commonalities and core time tested principles still apply, but you're talking about a different audience. In the military, you have people that raise their hand, they want to be there, and they're driven by a high degree of loyalty and pride, where that doesn't necessarily, or it's not at such a high level in the private sector. And so you've got to lead those people differently. And so leadership is fluid. It's an evolution. And I've got a concept called evolved leadership, not some elevated status of leadership, but it's basically a premise of like, if you're not evolving, or the point at which you stop evolving, you will become less irrelevant or totally irrelevant to the people around you as well as your organization.
Yeah, I think one of the, this is a bit of a hot take, but I think it's accurate, is that veterans can tend to be a little bit entitled when we get out of the military and get into an organization, or even before we get into an organization, right? I can't tell you how many officers and senior enlisted, I go to their LinkedIn profile and I look, they put the equivalent of the civilian rank that they had at every given unit. And I'm like, I'm sorry, brother, but you were not a CEO. You were not a COO. We all know that the DoD's budgets are fugazi and are not real. So until you've operated a real P&L with real people who've been doing it, for the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years within the civilian sector, you don't actually know what you're talking about. You need to integrate into that organization, learn, observe, and then begin to execute and implement some of your things. And also you're going to have to probably continue some of the things that they're doing well and learn from those folks that have been on the ground.
Hey, Carey, we have to have the same conversations with the veterans fresh out of the military that we place in companies. If somebody already has 10 years of experience, they've usually struggled along the way to figure that out. But we tell very senior, whether senior enlisted or senior officers, it's not a lateral transfer. You're actually moving down. And you just said it. You ran a cost center. You managed a budget in the military. Does that apply to the private sector? Yes, but now you're running a profit center, and that's a completely different game where management makes decisions. Decisions are turned into activities, which produces results, and then you've got to determine how you change those activities to steer the results in the direction that you want, and that brings in the financial analysis and accounting that plays into that of what a return on investment is. So I went out and I did recognize that I didn't know anything about business. I went and got an MBA. Just had this conversation with another guy, Charlie Felker. He is a West Point graduate, but like 6'5", the sweetest man you'll ever meet. Started multiple companies, 2 exits, went and got his MBA. And he actually said, he's like, I wish I just went into the arena. I just started a lawn care company or some services company and just struggled through it. I think it would have been a more valuable education than the 2 years both he and I took to get our MBAs. There was some knowledge there. I was appreciative of it. But I think, when you're forced to learn it rapidly because, your revenue and operating costs are being impacted hourly, if not daily, you're forced to one, educate yourself and then make changes. And that's the best learning I've ever seen is on the job.
Yeah, I think undergraduate and graduate degrees in the civilian world are more of like network centers where you're able to build a network and less practical teaching and coaching. It's really strategic and really network oriented, but it's not super tactical. And they leave out the relationship building portion of the network. You just go through all these programs and meet all these people, collect all these business cards, collect all these LinkedIn connections. And then you're not actually building a real relationship with a real human who's doing real work.
Yeah. And especially if you're going into entrepreneurism, MBAs are for corporate settings. Like it's a box you have to check. I took new venture creation. But again, I think it would have been much more valuable, or it would have been an awesome opportunity if that MBA said, okay, this is your team. You guys are going to go start a business, figure out what you want to do, and you're going to run that business for 2 years while you're getting your education. That would have been more invaluable.
Yeah, it's like what Stanford says. My cousin got her PhD at Stanford, and they tell their students throughout the entire program, from undergraduate all the way up to the PhD program, the minute that you can drop out and quit because you have something that works and you can go do it, please, for the love of God, get the hell out of here and go do it in the private sector.
That's rare for an institution of higher learning to say that, but that's awesome. And I know there's plenty of examples of kids coming out of Stanford that are highly successful.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd love to jump into the writing process a little bit here. You mentioned it when we were talking about the concepts that are in this book and what you learned from each other as you were writing it. So for you who's written books before, what was it like to write a children's book? What was the process like? And feel free to get as granular as you want. And then what was the collaboration like between you and CZ?
Yeah. So in Chris and Colin, we're involved in that process as well. I'll tell you what, I'm more proud of this thing than I am my other like 200 and 275 page books, which are harder to write. But we felt like this was going to have more impact. And so we honed down on like, what are the first 3 attributes we want to go after that were instrumental in our careers. And, resilience is the military is going to find a way or put you in a situation that's going to knock you down over and over and over again. And one of the things they value is we make our training hard so that when you're in a real world scenario, it's actually, you're like, dude, the training was harder than this. So resilience was key to us and it was key to our careers. Perseverance is the ability just to stay with it when others would quit and to make the sacrifices necessary in order to become a subject matter expert within your realm, the warfighter, tactically and technically proficient, and then the overwhelming power of optimism. And so when we started there with those 3 attributes that we wanted to eke out in the book, we knew it was basically about turning setback into success, because every success story, people think, oh, wow, that person was just highly successful. Well, they were it took them 20 years to become successful. We say an overnight success. It's no such thing. So that's when we started to write the story. And I'd asked CZ, I said, hey, with my daughter on the way, I'd love to do something cool for her so that when she is coherent and cognitive enough to understand it, she could have a point of pride. And basketball was my background. And the story started to come alive. It changed, and we went through the final manuscript, probably 20 different edits. There was on version 20, we finally ended up where we ended up. The illustration part was completely new to me, and we've learned a lot. It probably didn't turn out the way, knowing what we know now, how we would have done it. But then you had to layer the illustrations, and how that worked is we had to find an artist, and then we had to provide the information of where we wanted the illustrations and what we thought they wanted to be, but also allowing them in their subject matter expertise to weigh in of, hey guys, I think this will work better. So that was almost a completely independent process from actually writing the manuscript. And that probably took the longest time because illustrations are harder than writing I think, what is the book, around 7,000 words. But when you put a book out, and it was very difficult with the first one, you're basically putting yourself out there to the world. And given social media and electronic communication, I call them the keyboard cowards. You'll hear comments from people, but it's similar, hey, this book sucked, you could have done this better. And there may be truth in what they're saying. The way they say it is lacking in professional tact and grace. But it's so easy for people to take pop shots at those in the arena. It's the old Teddy Roosevelt speech, the man in the arena, those in the cheap seats will never know how the victorious man stumbled. And yeah, we thought we were going to be able to finish this in like 2 to 3 months. It ended up taking about, I think, 7 to 8 total, because it was our first one. But now that we have this iteration under our belt, I think the process will streamline, but we will still be, CZ got emotionally attached to things. I got emotionally attached to things. And that's where when you co-author a book, it's where do you give, a little leniency and say, hey, let's go with your idea. Same for him. Hey, Mike, yeah, let's go with your idea. So there's that back and forth. But this was relatively easier to write than my other books, yet I feel more impactful with this than I do my other books, which were both bestsellers.
Did somebody write an outline and then you kind of traded it back and forth, and then you started writing the manuscript and traded back and forth? Were you writing together? What did that? Collaboration?
You nailed it. The logical was, hey, let's just do an outline of sort of the major sequences of the story. Then once we went back and forth on that, we'd write the first sort of sequence, go back and forth, move on to the second sequence, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, until each sequence was done. But then you have to put it together and make sure that flow makes sense. You want to know that the hardest part of that was actually the definitions of resilience, perseverance, and optimism, because we wanted to make sure those were nailed, that a young 8-year-old could read one and be like, oh yeah, that's speaking to me, and I totally understand it. Resilience is getting up in the face of adversity, no matter what. And so that was probably the hardest part. Those definitions probably changed, not 20 times, but probably like 30 to 40 times.
Yeah, no doubt. And it's funny because kids get to a certain age and they start asking you questions, and they ask you what something means. It could be something like my daughter and I were reading another book the other day and the other night, and it was like a superhero book, Wonder Woman or something like that. And it mentioned a symbol. And my daughter said, Dad, what's a symbol? And I was like, it's 8:00 at night. I'm putting you to bed. Like, I'm not entirely prepared to define something that I've just known since I was your age, like what it is, you know what I mean? And so I had to like think about it for a second. And I said, oh, well, when you see a heart, what does that make you think of? And she said, love. I said, well, that's a symbol. A heart is a symbol of love, and other things are symbols of other things. Right. And she said, oh, okay. And I'm like, I dodged that one, but now I have to be ready. Not dodged it. Right. Like I gave her a good enough answer, but it's got me on my toes to be like, okay, she's going to start asking questions. I need to start having a perspective and some answers. But again, back to what you're describing, I also need to be willing to have a conversation. What can I learn from her? What is she seeing at her level that I forgot from when I was 4 or 5, 6 years old, that as we have these conversations to understand what things mean in the world and how we move our way through the world, that's a conversation. Granted, I'm the parent, my wife is also the parent. So at the end of the day, it's our standards in the home that are going to drive her forward. But we're also humble enough to say, oh, okay, well, there's some things that I can learn from you as we read this book together. What do you pull from it that I'm missing? Because I'm just thinking about it from the dad's perspective.
As you're talking, it really makes me think of just the simplicity sort of concept. And of course, in the military, we say KISS, keep it simple, stupid, for a reason. But I think as we grow older, as we become adults, we want to feel that we have some advanced perspective on concepts that nobody else has. And I disagree with that. When I made it to JSOC in the first operation I was on, I'd never seen a military unit maneuver like that, coming from the regular SEAL teams. And the senior enlisted guy who was a master chief, great dude who ended up perishing. I came to him and I'm like, I've never seen a military unit so advanced. And he sort of had this allergic reaction. And I was sort of shocked. Like I thought I had pissed him off, and I'm still a new guy. I don't want to piss off. I'm trying to get along and integrate into the team. He said, Mike, there's nothing advanced about us. We are masters of the basics. And when you look at it, to sort of translate that is, I remember my father with the definition of integrity, and there's many different definitions and you can get nuanced and granular. He basically said, it's doing the right thing, especially when others aren't watching. And when you get to the military, that's probably one of the most commonly used definitions of integrity. It doesn't. So what he told me as a 9 or 10-year-old didn't become more advanced for those in their 20s, 30s, and 40s who are leading humans in some of the most austere environments. And it still sticks with me today. Why is there any necessity to make integrity more complex? It always goes back to that root of do the right thing, especially when others aren't watching. And it actually helps, it helped me again, where, I'm like your father, I'm in leadership development, keynote speaking with companies. It's trying to get it down to just the basic root level and leave it there. Now, if you want to have a longer conversation over a fireplace, we can have that and actually get nuanced. But for when you're leading 100 people, there's no reason to make things complex or complicated. Leave it at the root level, because people have a lot of stress in their lives, deadlines, due dates, budgets. They've got to manage. Keep it simple.
Yeah, people might be listening and say, "Oh, that sounds obvious to me," but what's non-obvious and why it works so well is that when you keep things fundamental and you operate by the basics, it keeps it practical. It keeps it rooted in things that you can actually control, things that you can actually do, and then you're not philosophizing about, well, what about this? What if a scenario, like this happened? Then should I still have to have integrity? It's like, is that scenario happening to you right now? No? Okay. This is the basic fundamental definition of this value that we have that's going to drive our behavior, that is then going to drive the outcomes that we're chasing, whether this be business, personal, or relational.
Yeah, it's almost like here's the broad guidance. Here's the broad guidance of this value. And if you end up in that situation, that you're going to have to make a swift decision based off the information you see. And I always say culture is baked into every conversation. Is the decision I'm about to make in accordance with my values? If it's not, you better think a little longer about it. If it's a time-sensitive situation, you're going to make a decision. It may be the wrong decision, but guess what? You have time to reflect afterwards, as long as you take that time for reflection and learning after any significant event.
Right. I mean, the old trope that it doesn't get easier, you get better, right? Like every person, Instagrams that or Pinterests that or whatever, and we all kind of roll our eyes at it. But it's true, because the situations that you're going to encounter, the environments that you're going to be in, the events that you experience from childhood into adulthood are going to get progressively more difficult, which is why you need to master the fundamentals and the basics of these ethics that you value, because at each stage you're going to experience more difficulty. But at the end of the day, the same standard is going to be expected of you. And to your point, as you get older, as you get into more intense situations, you're going to have to make those more quickly, which is all the more reason you should be practicing them from childhood.
I heard a good one the other day, because I'm only 6 years retired, but I call them truisms.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a X post where somebody said, you don't get rich in the first 5 years of business, you get better.
Mm-hmm.
Rich is for the period that follows after that. Not that I'm trying to get rich, but it was just like, oh, how true that is. How many bad mistakes I've made, but learned, and how much more effective and efficient I am in the business decisions that I make today.
Yeah, that's exactly right. One of the great things about the story structure here, right, is that the tryouts for basketball or for any other sport are it's a great baseline structure outline already for a story, right? Especially for somebody who might be going through that for the first time. We always tell our daughter, like, hey, we want to expose you to a wide range of sports and activities. You have to try them. If you decide that you don't like it after you've made it through the process of actually trying, then that's fine. We can make that decision as a family after that, but you got to try stuff.
Yeah.
And the basketball tryouts are kind of a great story structure. Is that where you started? And obviously basketball was a big part of your life. Did you think about that story structure beforehand, or was that something that just kind of came together?
I did. In what popped into my mind is it wasn't basketball, it was swimming. I was 8, tried out for a club swim team, did not make it, and had a probably temper tantrum meltdown in the parking lot. My family still laughs about the story. They got me to a lesser competitive club to swim for 1 year, came back and made the team the following year. And the story just popped out of, at the time, if you had asked me when I made the team a year later, had I recognized the amount of work that I put in to get there? No, I wouldn't have recognized it. But, 40 years of hindsight, I can look back and we laugh about that now. Of my parents basically said, hey, you're going to have to demonstrate resilience, perseverance here, of just putting the work in to come back and prove them wrong. And that's what happened. So that popped out. I'm like, oh, it's the perfect story, though I love basketball a lot more than I loved swimming.
Yeah, that's great. Like I said, we always tell our daughter, like, you have to try. And if you don't succeed, that's okay. You're not going to be successful in everything, but you need to try. And, she's at that stage now. She's 4.5. She'll turn 5 in February. So she's trying all these different things, T-ball and swimming and, kind of dance and gymnastics and all these different things. And this book actually came at a perfect time, because she's at that stage right now where she's athletic and she's smart. So she's good at a lot of things. So up to this point, it's been pretty easy for her to make her way through the world and just be good at stuff. Now she's starting to experience, a little bit more of the technical aspects of catching a ball, throwing a ball, stepping the right way, the dance moves and the gymnastics and things like that. And she's starting to experience that, oh, I don't like this feeling of not being good at something. So this book came at the perfect time, because it's a great story for us to read and say, no, you got to keep trying. It's not the success that we're after. It's the striving.
Even children, even adults will confront something that does not come natural to them, and they quit. I'm not good at it. Rather than pushing through and putting the time and effort in to develop some proficiency. And, as I think back to the military, again, a California kid from the Bay Area, had never fired a rifle before in my life, before joining the Marine Corps. Nothing came naturally to me. Could I run? Could I swim? Could I do pull-ups and push-ups? Yeah, pretty much anyone can. But when it came to the tactics and everything, nothing came easily to me. But that was the challenge from which I learned so much. We learned so much from adversity, even continuing to persevere in things that we don't necessarily like. And there's a lot of things in the military I didn't like. But from a point of pride and knowing that I could extract such great lessons from that experience, you just keep pushing on. And I am huge on what we're both saying is expose your kids to as much adversity as possible. And let me give you an example. I just wrote an article for Sports Illustrated. If you saw in the news that certain schools were excusing children from excused absences for Wednesday due to the election, I think that is fundamentally flawed. And actually, it's almost advocating or promoting, hey, it's okay to have mental health issues.
Yep.
What they should have done, and this is my opinion, is said, okay, be that as it may, life has to go on. So if we need to come into school and have a discussion for 4 hours about how are you feeling, articulating it, and talking through, okay, if this is adversity through you, how are you going to push forward and learn from that? Or, hey, is this really, truly impacting your life? And I'm sure media has something to play into that with the anxiety and depression that they're putting into people. But they should be having conversations, not allowing people to take excused absences because they're hitting a little bit of a stressful period in their life. I mean, could you hold up a yellow card on your deployments and say, hey guys, I'm just feeling stressed right now? No, you had to continue on because, your team was depending on you, regardless of the circumstances of the environment. And so what I feel is we're not raising the resilient leaders that are going to hit a ton of adversity, not only in their professions, but marriage, life, finances, possibly divorce. And they just can't quit. They've got to keep moving forward because if all of society just quits, well, I mean, you can draw what the implications of that are going to be on our nation and the world as a whole.
Yeah, my wife was an educator in her previous career, middle school English, and she was teaching in a blue district the first time that Trump got elected. And when he was inaugurated, she turned it on because it's a historical event, and and administrators and people say you can't have that on. She said, I don't care how anybody feels here. This is a historic event. This is the inauguration of the president of the United States. This is an 8th grade English class. These kids should see this, right? Regardless of how you feel about it, right? I just had another thought. Oh yeah. So as you were saying that, so yes, kids need to, and parents need to help their kids chase opportunities for resilience. As parents, we need to do that as well, right? My wife played D1 college golf. She was a 4-year letter winner in the SEC. We play a lot of golf together, and I just started getting kind of okay. And over the course of the last 10 years, as we've been playing together, dudes will be like, oh man, it must suck that your wife is better than you at golf. I'm like, well, for 2 reasons, it doesn't suck. One, I never have to ask to play. So you might have to ask your wife to go play golf, but we get to go play together. Or if I'm going to go play with the boys, she knows what that feels like. And that's really good. And the other piece is she's better than me. So I get on field coaching, on course coaching from a scratch golfer. And I get to learn by observing, and then I get to ask her questions and listen to what she says. And so over the course of the last 10 years, I just got my handicap to under 20 for the first time. And she was asking, we were talking, she actually wasn't there for that round. I played with some other guys, and we were debriefing it after. And, she was asking all the technical questions, right? Like, what did you do different this time? Where did you see success and all these different things? And I said, well, I mean, I felt you on my shoulder saying, okay, play this, hold this way, do this. And I want to get into all the technical golf stuff, right? But I told her, I said, the reason that I love playing golf is because I'm not good at it. And so if this is something that I know that I can play for the rest of my life because of the handicap system and all these different things, I can chase trying to get good at something I'm probably never going to be good at. And that is great for my mental health.
And I got to say, from a totally just human perspective, it's also sort of hot. Romance marriage, it's just sort of hot. Yeah. My wife's into fitness. She was right at like 9.5 months pregnant, and she's rowing 145 pounds. And she got a lot of weird comments on social media of like, you shouldn't be doing that. But I saw the video because we don't go to the same gym, and I'm like, okay, that's sort of hot.
Yeah,
I'm like, that's really hot. So
yeah, you're 100% right. All right, would be respectful of your time here and kind of start to wrap things up. But before I get to the open-ended question that I ask at the end of each episode, you mentioned this first in a series. You also mentioned a little bit about iterating on the process. How's that process going as you continue to collaborate and then bring new folks into the fold to collaborate on further volumes? What's that iterative process like for you, and how's that collaboration going?
So the next book's going to be very different, and it's really in CZ's court because it's going to be the tale of Ramon Colon-Lopez, life lessons in character, competence, and confidence. And I can't really write this story. He's got to do the first draft. And then I can come in and say, hey, why don't we change the story without, altering the facts of it in this way. And it's also like, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. I'm sure there will be some manipulation because we're trying to teach children. But this one is different in that sense that the ball's in his court, and then I'll come in after the fact, and then we'll work through the illustrations together. But we've got an individual that we have in mind for the next story. And so what I think how this is going to be is it's almost like CZ and I become ghostwriters in a sense. So it's, if we were writing a book about Carey, we're interviewing you and then producing the story and then pushing it back to you. Hey, is this accurate? and having the dialogue back and forth of like, hey, can we keep this in? We'll change what you want changed. But this, in focusing on military members, is dear to us. Like the military gave me so much, and I am pro-military, and I think so is CZ naturally, is we don't like the public who has no military experience painting us into a corner of thinking what we are, to usually playing off the lowest common denominator. We want to tell the stories of these amazing military figures. And if that means 100 volumes, that's where we're going to go with it. But we're pretty much becoming ghostwriters to someone else's story, which is sort of cool. I'll say this, CZ and I agree on this. We feel so much more pride and enjoyment watching our brothers and sisters succeed than our own. And that's the humility in CZ, is if we can help, promote one of the stories of our brothers and sisters in arms, that's what we're going to absolutely do. I never want a book written about me, never want to do a book about me, not an autobiography or anyone else. But I love working with children. And let me say this also, Carey, one of the most valuable tours I had in the military was I ended up as the director of the junior officer training course at BUDS. It's basically after the young officers graduate the hard stuff, I have 1 month to turn them into a ground force commander. And as much as I would always choose a combat deployment over a training deployment, it was still one of the most valuable tours, because those young men were like sponges. They wanted to know everything that you knew. And you wanted to pass them everything you know so that they could actually become better and develop their own philosophies or perspectives on things or processes and procedures. And that's why CZ, who's also in charge of training for basically the pararescue schoolhouse, we love training. We love training, and that's why we're doing what we're doing.
I love it. Great answer. Mike, where can folks find you? Where can we drive traffic on the internet and social? Where can folks find the book?
Yeah, absolutely. The book, we always go anywhere books are sold, but just go to Amazon. It seems like everyone goes to Amazon. You can find me, I always hate to say this, MikeSarraille.com. We're working on getting CZ a website, which will probably be Ramon Colon-Lopez.com or some amalgamation of that. Our next book, The Tale of Ramon Colon-Lopez, will probably be anywhere from January to March. And then CZ is working on a book called Carnivore Leadership, which is more focused for adults. So we're excited about that one. I think that will come around the same time, March, April of next year. So yeah, go to MikeSarraille.com or find CZ on LinkedIn. I'm also on LinkedIn heavily. And if you need anything from us, just reach out.
Great. Yeah, we'll tag and collaborate and post and all that good stuff. Mike, to end each episode of the podcast, I ask an open-ended question. What's on your heart and your mind for our community right now? Could be a piece of advice, something you want to get off your chest, or something you want to reiterate from what we've talked about today. Mike, what's on your heart? What's on your mind?
Yeah, when people say they're not political creatures, that's absolutely bullshit. We're all political in nature. And even in the military, when we say we're apolitical, you're political in nature. We just closed out. We're 2 days after a major historical election. The country was divided, though a larger majority voted for President Trump to come back into office. We've got to move forward. Not everything or the decisions that will be made will align with your beliefs, but welcome to adulthood. Same in the military. Decisions were made that we disagreed with, but guess what? Second the decision's made, we're moving forward as if it was our own decision. And we are a nation divided, and we've got to find some way to have dialogue again and to agree to disagree on certain things. But it's been hard for a lot of vets to come back, having served, whether 4 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, to come back when all you know is this tribal environment of loyalty and personalities. Don't get me freaking wrong. That at the end of the day, you can agree or disagree, but you are a tribe under one flag, and it sucks when you come back to the civilian sector and you just don't find that commonality anymore. So we've got to somehow find a way back to it.
Yeah, well said. And just like with everything else in our society and culture, our community, the military community, and the veteran community can be the ones to lead the way and show everybody else what's possible and how to do it.
Amen. And if you're a vet looking for a job, go to talentwargroup.com. We'll try to help you. If not, you'll get some good advice to help you on a self-search to find that employment or potentially start your own business.
Great. We'll put that out there too. Mike, appreciate your time. Appreciate your energy. Appreciate the book.
Thank you, Carey.
Cheers.